Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome back to Viking.TV. My name's David Burgess, and for the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to take you through South America. Now, I'm not going to take you on a road trip. I'm not going to take you on a train ride. I'm not even going to take you on a Viking cruise, because the journey that we're going to take you on today is a mythological and a magical journey. It's a journey that almost never happened, and you'll see what I mean later on in the episode. Now, the way that the great Inca Empire fell to just a handful of Spanish soldiers is a well-known story. It's actually one of history's greatest adventures. And on the surface, it may seem to be on the same scale as many other epic encounters between European and South American empires during the time period that we know as being the Age of Discovery. But all was not as it first seemed, because a great deal of the triumphs and the victories turned out to be hollow, and the tragedy of the fallen actually far outweighed the value of the treasures the conquistadors took from the civilization that they had brought down. A priceless store of records, legend, and history was lost, ruthlessly destroyed as being works of the devil because the Incas didn't have the same religious beliefs as Spain. All of that prosperity was left with was a great amount of artistic remains and awe-inspiring ruins. But the thing that was left behind, and in far greater quantity than everything else combined, was quite simply silence. So why do I say this? Well, I say it simply because the Andean civilizations had no form of written language. And after the last of the priests and the teachers had left or died, so did the last hope of learning their secrets. Or at least at the time, that's how it seemed. But as people, we're all inquisitive. And if it were not for that fact alone, all we would be left with is the exquisite art and the ruins of some great but long-dead cities. But the Spanish conquerors did keep for us a small part of the folklore of this once great civilization, and it was this glimpse into a relatively unknown past that unlocked and opened the path that archaeologists were then able to follow. So soon afterwards, a fantastic range of cultures, going back some 3,000 years, started to slowly emerge from the shadows. We started to discover and we started to learn about these unknown ancient civilizations. We started to learn about the great empires. We started to learn all about the passions and the rivalries between great kings, and we could only marvel at the mighty engineering feats that we have never been able to replicate, even with the help of 21st century know-how, money, and technology. And then we discovered the Incas, a ruling dynasty that thought of themselves as being living gods, and they ruled accordingly. Thankfully today, our knowledge of the beliefs and traditions of these once lost cultures and these once lost civilizations, even considering the loss of so much evidence, has been enhanced by new discoveries and the fact that so much has survived in the customs of the present-day Quechua and Aymara people, both of whom are direct descendants of those who fell to the Spanish conquistadors. And throughout South America, including its far-flung and furthest places, comes a folklore and stories that have been handed down orally from the memories of past generations, meaning that each generation entrusted the following one with continuing the tradition that their forefathers had started thousands of years before. Almost every kind of human experience had been encountered by the people of South America. And today, during this program, my aim is to pass some of these stories and some of these experiences over to you. Now, over the years, I've been speaking on Viking ocean ships, and I've always tried to include at least one presentation which looks at the folklore, the legends, and the mythology of the area of any given itinerary. And because of that, I actually feel as if I'm in a rather a good position, if you like, to be able to compare one set of mythology to another. And it's quite surprising to discover that many of them are indeed quite similar. Maybe not so much in content, maybe not so much in explanation, but in the main topic. In other words, what was it that created or developed a particular myth in the first place? So as an example of what I'm talking about here, almost every mythological dynasty includes the creation. Where did we come from? How did we get here? Quite a few include a story concerning a great flood, and that's actually a far more common a theme than you may have previously thought. We then have the afterlife. What happens next? And then we have natural phenomena. So, to us, sat in our homes today, storms, thunder, lightning, hailstorms, snow, even night and day, are all things that we, indeed even our children and grandchildren, know about and understand. But thousands of years ago, that wasn't the case. But that didn't mean that people of the day didn't want to know the reasons. What did they do? Well, they turned to their respective religious leader to get the answer. So while mythology is different from religion, that's not to say the two never intersect, because they often do. However, mythologies are usually a combination of real events, folklore, regional superstitions and legends that create, if you like, a wider, but not necessarily interconnected system of cultural beliefs. Religions, on the other hand, are considered to be more about a devotion to a faith or an observance. And that distinct difference just sometimes, and is just something to keep in mind as we wade into just a few of the deep mythologies from South America. But before we do that, I think it's only fair to say that South American mythology is a vast field whose reach extends linguistically and archaeologically beyond the continent itself, and as such, can also be included in the oral traditions of Panama and eastern Costa Rica, as well as those of the indigenous inhabitants of the West Indies. So since the early 16th century, more than 1,000 languages have been listed for this area. In fact, that suggests that South America was populated over a great number of centuries by successive migratory groups that could well have reached South America from areas as far away as Siberia, as well as North and Central America. It's believed that these migrations began more than 20,000 years ago. And this is despite the fact that the majority of early South American archaeological sites date from between 12 and 14,000 years ago. But having said that, we also take into account the fact that quartz tools found in the South American country of Brazil back in 1983 have been dated to be about 25,000 years old. So, where did these people live? Well, the higher civilizations of ancient South America occupied the Andean region and the Pacific coast from what today is northern Colombia to central Chile. However, from the point of view of mythological studies, the what are termed primitive cultures, at least, or indeed maybe, well, let's put that in a slightly different way, shall we? What we today may term as being a primitive culture are the ones, as far as we're concerned, that are at least as, or maybe even more important, as the higher civilizations, because it is usually the less developed societies where the vast collections of these sacred stories actually come from. See, South American sacred stories about the world originated, as a rule, to conform to the beliefs of creation out of nothing, by the will, if you like, of a supernatural being. But instead, they commonly depict the coming into being and unfolding of what we call a primordial spirit. Now, in many cases, little is said about the actual genesis of the world, but a detailed description of the structure of the universe is given. This description points to the universe's tiered levels. It points to the Earth's axis, which is often thought of as being in the shape of a cosmic tree. Heavenly bodies, such as the stars and the planets, are mostly thought of as being the transformation of heroes, animals, or other mythological creatures. Many myths deal with characteristics of the sky, and not a few of those with the underworld. So there are numerous stories about the origin of night. They're even more abundant than the myths of world creation. They are the destruction of the world, with the recurrent agents of destruction being water or fire or both. The Paro, who lived on the south bank of the Orinoco, believed that everything was created by the powers of imagination. In the beginning, they say, there was nothing at all. But the first thing to appear was the sky, then the air, and then the wind. With the wind, words of songs were born, and they were carried across the country from one settlement to another. The words of these songs are the creative powers that produce thoughts and visions. Out of nothing, they imagined and created Buko, the first being who developed from the words in those songs. And then Buko imagined he had a sister. And because of this, Chehura, his sister, was born. And this very act became the reason why mankind also has the power of imagination. The Piero believed through imagination comes fact. And if you think about it, that's really the only thing that humans have. The Kogi, who live in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, have a creation story that also underscores the spiritual nature of both the first beings and of the essence of the universe itself. According to this myth, creation took place in 9 stages. From the bottom of stage 1, working its way all the way up to stage 9. Each stage is a combination of both a cosmic level and a spiritual being. This spiritual being is known as the Mother, who is, and this is only occasionally, accompanied by another spiritual being known as the Father. The first level lies completely in darkness. It's the sea. The second layer is a spiritual tiger. Then we can move on. The 5th is known as the first house of spirit. And finally, the fathers of the world found a huge tree and made a template in the sky above the water. And it was this temple that they named the House of Spirit. It was the Chibcha who lived in the highlands of Colombia at the time of the arrival of the Spanish. According to their creation myth, before there was anything in the world, there was always night. All the light was kept inside a great thing. This thing, at least according to the Spanish chronicler who recorded the story, is an omnipotent, universal, ever-good Lord and maker of all things. In other words, the Spanish conquerors interpreted the thing as being the same or an equivalent as to the being they referred to as God. This great being then began to show some light. To show, if you like, the dawn. It started to show the light that he had in himself, after which he, in that primordial light, started to create. His first creations were some blackbirds. He then commanded the blackbirds to fly all over the earth, covering everywhere with the breath from their beaks. The blackbird's breath was luminous and it was transparent. And after the bird's mission was completed, the whole world became as clear and illuminated as it is now. And then we have the South America Macuna, who lived in the lower Parana River at the Vapus region of Colombia. They believed that the Earth was actually shaped like a disc. So as you can see, there's really nothing new about the Earth being flat. There is also a subterranean river which bubbles up to the Earth's surface in the form of a whirlpool. In this river live all the monsters and all the bad spirits. But for now, let's go back to something I mentioned a few moments ago, the flat Earth. On a particular part of the surface of this disc shape is hot water lake. Every day, the sun would set sail along the lake in a boat. It would travel from east to west. Over Sun Lake, as it's known, there is a house where the Lord of the Jaguars lives, a place that only shamans in their flights to heaven can reach. Now, shamans or their equivalent have a role in many mythologies. They were believed to travel between worlds by either climbing the world tree or by flying. They communicated with the spirit world through ceremonies and through trances. The healing magic of the shamans also helped them to find ways of curing the lost or curing the damaged souls of people who were missing. Now, at the top of the cosmos is a layer that covers everything else. It's a bit like, if you like, the lid of a pan or a pot. And as far as the Makuna are concerned, there is nothing whatsoever past this lid. It's just void. It's emptiness. It's nothing. The Earth's disk, though, is made from several concentric zones, the innermost being their homeland. At the center, just below Sun Lake, stands a sacred mountain which supports the heavens. No one is allowed to take a stone from this mountain, because if they did, the mountain could collapse, bringing down the sky with it. The sky, which is up above, and the underworld, which is down below, are cosmic levels of special interest. They appear in myths influenced by the shaman stories of their celestial trips to both the upper and the lower worlds. The Mirikatari, Carib people living in the upper Orinoco area, turn around and say that in the beginning the whole world was nothing but sky. There was no separation between heaven and earth. The only thing there was light. Up in the sky lived all the good, wise people. They were people who never died, nor did they work. Food, always available. In the highest sky was Wanadi, who was still there, and it was he who gave his light to the people. And because of this, they were happy, and because of this, they were grateful. One day, Wanadi decided he wanted to make people, and he wanted to make them on a part of the sky that was known as Earth. He sent a spirit who made the first people, after which he gave them knowledge. He then gave them tobacco, and finally, the shamans' quartz power stones. But as we know, it's always the case that whenever you have yin, you have yang. And so later, an evil spirit called Arosha gave the people of the earth hunger and sickness and war and death. Now, some of the myths we've looked at so far show a close connection between the cosmic levels and the Earth's axis, which, as we said, is often represented by a gigantic tree. In the Matako myth, the danger of the sky falling is clearly pointed out, and this is something that is often repeated in the myths of many of South America's tropical forest tribes. The Kayopo of central Brazil turn around and say that in the east, there's a gigantic tree, which was known as the end of the sky. The tree held up the heavens, which in those days were parallel to the earth. After several tries, a tapir, which is a pig-like animal but with a slightly longer snout, managed to gnaw through the trunk of this sacred tree, after which the trunk of the tree snapped. As soon as that happened, the sky dropped down the edges, forming, if you like, a celestial vault. Around the tree's roots, all kinds of strange beings lived, and when a group of people went to explore the east, they found it so frightening, they turned around and fled back home. And after they got home and told their story, nobody ever went to the end of the sky again. Myths in the sky, well, myths which are usually associated with light at any rate, can also be related to the origins of night. Now, this next story is told by the Huiba, who live in the western plains of Colombia, and this story tells us that in ancient times there was no night, only an endless daytime. Now, I know what you're thinking. You may be thinking that actually sounds quite ideal. But it wasn't for the people who lived there at the time. And the reason for that was quite simply they couldn't go to sleep. A woman who had gone completely out of her mind because of the constant daylight wanted to break the sky. Her husband, who was a shaman, had had a dream about what would happen if she did. He warned her to be careful and that under no circumstances at all was she to damage the sky. Now at this point, I must let you know that the sky was owned by a swarm of very large locusts. But, as I'm sure you'll have figured out by now, she paid absolutely no attention whatsoever to her husband. She went outside, picked up the largest stone she could, threw it up into the air as hard as she could. After she did this, there was a loud crack as the stone smashed its way through the sky. Immediately, the daylight vanished. Earth was dark, and at that exact same time, the earth was invaded by a massive swarm of locusts, each the size of iguanas. In one form or another, they attacked everybody, except for one person, the woman's husband, the shaman. After the locusts had done their work, and they had all gone back to wherever it was they came from, a flock of birds appeared, each bird carrying in its beak a heavy load of mud, which they used to repair the damage in the sky, very much like they would to build a nest. Now, apart from the sky, the sun and the moon also play important roles in many South American myths. Their origins, like those of stars and constellations, are due, in many cases, to the transformation of humans in the mythical stories. And this is something that's not unique to South American mythology, because it can also be found in many mythological stories from around the world. As an example of this, in South America, there are even many versions of the widespread myth of the twins and the jaguar. For in the end, they all have the mythological heroes ascending to the sky to become the sun and the moon. This is perhaps the most common myth throughout South America. It's found from Panama to the Gran Chaco, and from the eastern coast of Brazil to the Amazonian forests of southern Peru, among dozens of tribes that speak mutually unintelligible languages. Different versions of this story actually diverge considerably, but basically they all contain the same essential plot points, which, if you think about it, is quite something, because if you consider the complete and utter lack of communication between peoples living in South America thousands of years ago, why should everything be similar? Now, the main basis of this particular myth is that a mysterious god has an affair with a human woman who then finds she's pregnant, after which the mysterious god abandons her. She then goes for a walk alone in the forest. Now, at some point during this walk, the mother is attacked and killed by one or more jaguars. But the jaguar's mother takes pity on the baby twins, and she raises them as her own. So we now move forward a few years, as at some point in the future, a bird, or quite possibly some other animal, tells the twins the real story of how their mother died. The twins, who after hearing the truth, take revenge for their mother and kill all the jaguars except for one. And this one escapes. And it's actually from this one escaped jaguar that all the present-day jaguars are descended from. After the attacks are over, the twins, and I've no real idea as to what it's about, but the twins have a massive argument, after which they climb up to the sky, where they can still be seen today, because one twin is the sun, the other twin is the moon. But as an example, if you like, of the differences between many versions of this story, I should tell you that there is a rich Mashko account of this tale, and in this version, the twins are not in the story. In this version, it's an extraordinary boy called Amarinke, who kills the jaguars and then goes up to heaven and becomes Euparax, Euphrates is the god of lightning. Now, historically, it's very well known that pre-Columbian Carib of North and South America were highly skilled navigators of the Caribbean Sea, and they had a rich mythology about stars and constellations, some of which has actually survived to the present day. One of their stories tells about a newly married girl who was seduced by a man who, for some reason, then took on the form of an animal I mentioned not too long ago, the tapir. He asked her to follow him eastwards to the place where the earth and sky met. And bear in mind how long ago these tales originated, because today we would simply refer to the place when the earth and the sky meet as the horizon. Now, at this point, I must be perfectly honest with you, because I've no idea whatsoever how this next part happened. So I'm just asking you to accept it did. The lady's husband, whose name was Sirakai, was chopping wood at the time he found out what his wife had done. And on hearing the news, he accidentally cut off his leg with the axe. Now, after realizing what he'd done, he immediately ran off, or maybe I should say he hopped off, to find his mum, who knew, as probably only mothers do know, exactly what to do to make everything better for her son, after which he set off to find his runaway wife. He eventually found her in the company of the tapir. Seeing the two of them together made him angry, and in temper he attacked and killed the tapir, then cutting off the animal's head, presumably using the same axe he had in his earlier account. So, after killing his wife's lover, he begged and begged his wife to go back with him, saying that if she wouldn't, he would follow her forever. She was having none of it. She took her chances and ran as fast as she could, chased by both the spirit of her lover and her one-legged husband. Finally, she had nowhere left to run as she'd reached the edge of the earth. She'd reached the point where the earth and the sky met. Realizing she had no other option, she threw herself into the deep blue sky. And on a clear night, you can still watch her, because she is being turned into the Pleiades, with Tapir's head close behind. And if you know where to look, then you'll clearly see the star cluster which is known as Hades. Looking a little closer, you'll also notice the star called Aldebaran, which is the tapir's red eye. Also, you'll see Sarakai, who is today known as Orion, with Regal identifying the one leg the husband still has, and as a result, he is still able to chase after. Now, there's one thing I did mention almost at the start of this episode. It was regarding stories about the destruction of both the world and humankind by a flood. Maybe because of heavy rain, or because of high tides, or both. Not surprisingly, these tales are quite common in most regions of South America. Another type of myth of wholesale destruction is that of the world fire. In some cases, these stories may recall actual catastrophes, but their significance seems to be more symbolic of divine punishment dished out for the transgressions of traditional taboos. Often, the destruction is believed to have occurred in the past. Sometimes, though, the world fire is actually projected into the future. The earliest recorded American myth of the deluge comes from the Taino, who Columbus met on his first voyage of discovery. According to this version of the myth, a young man who wished to murder his father was banished and later killed by him. The old man kept his son's bones in a calabash. And a calabash it's a type of an urn. And they did so he and his wife could still be with their children. One day, they accidentally overturned the calabash and it fell to the floor. The contents spilled out everywhere. Immediately, the bones turned into fish. So they quickly scooped up the fish, and put them back. On another day, as the man was out in the fields, 4 brothers whose mother had died during their birth broke into the house. They saw and opened the calabash, and seeing it full of the fish, decided to eat them. Before they finished, though, they heard the father come back into the house, and they quickly tried to put the urn back in place. But instead, they dropped it. It fell to the ground and smashed into 1,000 pieces. The water, which was inside the calabash, gushed out. There was more and more and more of it, and soon the water from the calabash covered the whole earth. And from this event, the fish that were inside it evolved to become all of the fish in the sea. It's interesting to note that the theme of the deluge, as a consequence of killing or eating forbidden fish, is still as strong today amongst the contemporary Mataco of Argentina and southern Bolivia as it ever was. In the Andean countries, deluge myths are generally associated with a magic mountain where people would go for shelter. This particular mountain is magic because as the water rises, the mountain also rises. As a result, it is able to save the life of anyone who reaches the top. And one of the best-known examples of this myth was recorded as early as the 17th century. Today, though, South America is still a very well-known story. In the native traditions of the Huarachichi area of Peru, stories came out early in the 17th century that the flood was caused by a god whose presence on earth was not recognized by people, and they only wanted to party and have a wild time. Enraged, he advises a young woman who has looked after him and won his trust to take safety on a high mountain nearby. Soon afterward, a heavy rain carries the village away, leaving no one alive except, of course, the young girl on the mountain. Now, in the 1970s, a tribe in southern Chile whose mythology was thought at the time to have long since disappeared were being interviewed by researchers who discovered a long-lost collection of mythical tales, all in oral form. Amongst these stories is one about a devastating flood caused by the breaking of a law making it illegal to kill otters. In this tale, only a young couple to survive, and again, they survived by climbing a mountain. In Venezuela, a Carib tribe connects the flood with the world fire. They say that after the Great Flood, when everything has dried up, there was a great fire that consumed everything. And I mean everything. People, mountains, stones, whatever. The tribes of the Gran Chaco have a rich repertoire of myths about the world fire. And one of these myths from the Mataco says that long ago the Mataco lived in great disorder. One day, the sky was covered by black clouds. A lightning storm soon followed, along with torrential rain. The raindrops, though, were not water. These raindrops were fire, which spread everywhere. Very little and very few survived this onslaught. Sometimes, though, it's been quite difficult to get an entire story from a single source. And in some cases, it's taken the combined stories from several sources to get the full picture. It's a bit, if you like, it's a bit like a mythological jigsaw. Now, here's an example of one story where many fragments were collected on what was at first thought to have been a number of different myths about the destruction of the world by fire. According to this myth, the world fire was the first of 4 cataclysms that annihilated almost all creatures. And it will be repeated when the Creator removes the crossed beams from the underworld that keeps everything in place. Now, as soon as they are removed, the earth will catch fire. A long-lasting night is going to set in, and a blue tiger will emerge to devour all humankind. Another fire-based apocalypse mythological story included are the ones where only 2 people existed. One was the sun, the other was the moon, and both were male. One day, the sun obtained a beautiful plumed headdress that looked like it was made from fire. The moon liked it so much, he also wanted one for himself, so the sun got another, threw it to the moon, warning him, though, not to let it touch the ground. But as it was thrown towards him, the moon was afraid to catch the headdress, and he let it fall to earth, after which everything there was destroyed by fire. Now, since the start of today's look at South American mythology, I've spoken about many tribes from several different South American countries and cultures, but one I've hardly mentioned is probably the best known. Of course, I'm referring to the Inca. So I think it's time we put that right. Where did the Incas come from? Well, there are three main legends that cover this question. The first takes us to a cliff that has three small caves, or in some cases, three small houses on it. In each case, there is only a single entrance or exit to each. This spot is about 20 miles from the city of Cusco. In ancient times, we're told that there were 4 brothers and 4 sisters. They were the founders of the Inca dynasty. All 8 of them came through the exit of the center cave or the center house. Now, it's only right to tell you that depending on who tells you this tale, the number of brothers and sisters along with their names may vary. But overall, the legend is still the same one. And in some of the legends, there are other, non-royal Incas, if you like, that exit from the other 2 caves or the other 2 houses. What's agreed, though, is that the brothers and the sisters look and dress differently from the local people, and as a result, they very quickly gain moral ascendancy over them. The siblings briefly explore where they are and quickly agree that this is not the best place for them to stay, so they start to look for a more suitable and a more permanent home. Now, in every family, large families at any rate, there is usually one brother who really doesn't get along too well with his siblings. And even legendary royal dynasties are no exception to this rule. One of the brothers, whose name was Ayakachi, really got on the nerves of his siblings by showing off his great strength. He would climb to the top of Hunakori Mountain and throw giant rocks from his sling at the neighboring hills. And when these giant rocks hit the hills, the force of them would actually split the hill and open giant chasms and ravines. The siblings were really getting fed up with this and this showing off, so they devised a plan to trick him into going back to the cave or the house to pick up some supplies they'd left behind. He agreed, but of course, there were no supplies. And when he went inside to look for them, the other siblings sealed up the only exit, leaving him trapped inside. The siblings then left and set up a temporary settlement at Tambu Quarry, and it was here, at this spot, that the remaining siblings were visited by the spirit of their brother who had died as a result of being sealed up in the cave. And it was his spirit who gave them the direction to the place where they would finally settled and where they found the city of Cusco. After giving the directions to Ea, he then spirited himself to Mount Hanakori, where he transformed himself into a stone, which later would become an Inca cult, or in modern terminology, the place for an Inca pilgrimage. As unusual as it may sound, the idea that our human ancestors emerged from a cave or rocks is quite common in South America, as is the story of brothers where they are often portrayed as heroes or tribal founders. In this possible tale I've just told you may well have been hijacked by the Inca. They may well have adapted it to the local folklore to appease the local tribes of the time. This could account as to why there are multiple versions. Speaking of which, in the second version, the sun god took pity on the people living in Earth. He saw they were living quite an unruly and quite a barbaric existence. And this wasn't what he wanted, so in order to make things right, he sent down to Earth his 2 children, his brother and a sister. Their role on Earth was to instruct and to show the people how to live a civilized life, how to develop as a society. Now, the 2 carried with them a golden rod. And it wasn't just any golden rod, though, because this rod would tell them when they had arrived at the perfect spot to settle and to build their new city. They would know when they were there because the rod would be able to be pushed fully into the ground. Now, it's quite a good idea to do this because most of the land at the time, or certainly where they were, was quite rocky, and the topsoil was only a few inches deep. So finding a spot where the rod could be pushed into the ground from the base to the top really was quite an ask. Eventually, after many failed attempts, they reached the valley of Cusco. Now, for me to use the term valley could actually be a little misleading because the area is some 11,000 feet above sea level, so hopefully you'll get a good mental image of how the area would have looked. Here, they tried once again to push their rod into the ground. This time, the rod disappeared into the soil. They had found the place they were looking for, and it was here where the son and daughter of the sun god founded the city of Cusco, the seat of a future empire. In this version of the creation myth, let's also remember, in many cases, the word creation is really a term for the beginning of civilized society, not specifically the actual creation of humankind. In this version, the Inca sun god takes on the role of creator, and the founders of the city are thought of as being either cultural heroes or divine agents. But as we said before, there is also a third version of this myth. This one is a little darker, at least in some respects. So in this version, the Inca divine kingship came about as a result of pure deception perpetrated by an early Inca king who dressed himself up in a golden cloak. He then paraded himself around his subjects who, of course, had never seen anything so magnificent before. The robe was made in such a way that when the sun's rays reflected off the cloak, it gave the impression that the cloak itself was actually the sun, and this in turn elevated the wearer to that of the son of the sun god. At least that was the case in the eyes of those who witnessed this spectacle. Soon they had the desired intent, and the population started to worship this wayward Inca king as Earth's representative of the sun god. Now, depending on the research you do, this could have been one of 2 kings, the first being the very first Inca king, Manco Capac, or it could have been his successor, Sinchiroca. If we go with the second option, then the myth takes on another twist, which involves the second Inca king's mother. It's believed that she actually took the credit for this deception because it was the king's mother who spread the word throughout the population that the sun god was about to send a ruler down from the heavens to earth who would then reign in his name. She then produced the golden glittering cloak wearing Sinchiroca, and, as in previous versions of this myth, he emerged, no doubt very theatrically, from the mouth of a cave or a house into the glittering sun. And as you can imagine, the effect was instantaneous. As soon as the people saw this effect, they immediately accepted him as a true heaven-sent ruler. But having said that, there is an alternative creation myth when it comes to the Incas. And with this one, there is a connection of sorts between this creation mythology and those from different parts of South America as well as further afield. And again, it has been suggested that this creation mythology was hijacked by the Incas and adapted to suit their own ends, one of which would have been that the local populations accept them as their divine rulers, and modifying an existing creation myth would have been one way for the Incas to have done this, which is probably precisely what they did. So this tale starts just after the flood. Now, No one can say how the flood came about or why. Also, it's not known if this flood was the Great Flood around the time of Noah or whether it was a more localized one. The tale then goes on to tell us that after the waters receded, that a man appeared just outside of Cusco. This, though, was no ordinary man, as he had enormous strength. He was so strong, he was actually able to divide the world up into 4 separate pieces. He gave one part to each of 4 men that he called kings. The first piece he gave to Manco Capac, the second part to Kola, the third part he gave to Tokay, and the 4th part he gave to Pinhao. After this, and after he had done this, he ordered each of the kings to go and conquer their new land and govern all of the peoples that they found there. What we don't know, though, is how many people there were to be conquered, as most actually should have perished in the Great Flood itself. So the mythology is a little vague around that particular point. But the way that the world had been divided meant that Manco Capac traveled north, and eventually he would have reached the valley of Cusco, where he conquered the local population, after which he ruled over them from the new city which he founded. Now, the myths that we've just looked at are ancient stories, exhibiting the characteristics of South American cultures before contact with European civilization. But the creative forces of the natives' imagination were not totally destroyed by the arrival of the conquistadors, as old myths were recast in new molds, making allowance for the presence of the Spanish and for their ways. Hundreds of legends, which is a myth with some historical background, were coined in colonial times, and the process is still alive today, especially in many areas where indigenous and foreign cultures meet. One such legend is the so-called myth of Inca, which has been traced to several localities in the vicinity of Cusco. But what's interesting about this is it's also been found in other areas of Peru. Its gist is that a Spanish conqueror by the name of Pizarro imprisoned and beheaded Atahualpa, the Inca king. But the severed head, which they secretly kept somewhere, isn't dead. It's in fact regrowing its body. And when it's done so, the king will re-emerge and shake off the chains and fetters that hold the Inca people in bondage. Eventually, justice will be re-established, the ancient culture of the Incas will be restored. So I hope that you can see the people of South America are therefore just incredible natural storytellers. And no matter how far back you go, they've told their stories in all kinds of ways. They've told their stories through music. They've told them through dance. We know of their stories through rock carvings. We know of their stories through architecture. So, to conclude, I hope that this look at the mythology of South America has given you a small taste and some insight into the fascinating myths and legends that this continent has to offer. And in turn, I hope it's also inspired you to look further into the amazing stories and tales that make up this incredible mythology and legends that all come from South America. My name's David Burgess. Take care. Till next time. Bye for now.